people want to be led, and even the most independent-minded, self-managing people, they still fundamentally crave leadership. And I really believe this. I think it's human nature to crave that leadership and direction. And so you need to give it to people, and high-performing people, their bar is just higher for the leader that they want to work for and believe in. Some of the most satisfying moments for me at work are when I hear someone on the team sort of repeating the vision, the strategy, the goals, the language that I have crafted to help motivate people. And when I see someone take that same language and use it with their team, I know that I'm successfully propagating throughout the organization.
Welcome to Mission One, the Executive Edge. I'm your host, Gerard Miles, over here in the UK. And for a first for the Executive Edge, we have a guest coming onto the podcast to talk about their experiences, both in terms of how they've crafted their career, as well as how they've thought about hiring and attracting the best talent to their organization. So delighted to welcome Jonathan Knight onto the podcast from San Francisco. Good morning, Jonathan. It's 6 a.m. your time.
It is. Good morning. And I'm really happy to be here, Gerard. Great to see you. And thanks for having me on.
And for our listeners at home or in the car or wherever, we don't know where people are listening, Jonathan. We'd love them to tell us more. But wherever they are. So Jonathan is, we'll describe him as a lifelong game maker. And you have worked, Jonathan, I think pretty much with all the great and the good in a certain extent, starting your career, or at least part of it early in your career with Activision. Then you worked with EA. Then you worked with Zynga as an SVP of games over there. Then you went to WB Games before alighting with New York Times, which is not a games company. And I think that's going to be, or wasn't, maybe it is quasi or is a games company. I'd love to hear your view on that. But you're someone, Jonathan, who clearly has had a passion for making games and being a producer in games and then being a senior executive in these. Tell us about that, Jonathan. From a small child, were you enchanted with games, or what got you into the world of game making?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a household full of games for sure. My father was a board game collector and kind of a game fanatic and, a cryptographer. And he just, he used to bet on backgammon and bet on horse racing. And, so that was how I came up for sure. I've got two brothers, so the three of us plus our father, my mother always said she had four boys, the three of us plus the dad, and four made a good number for playing games, table tennis, whatever, Risk, Civilization. We had a home computer very early on, so I grew up, both writing games as I kind of learned to code like a lot of kids, and then of course playing games. So yeah, it was a big part of our childhood. I actually took a degree in drama for a while. I was directing plays. That was like my passion in school, and I went to graduate school for that. So that was a little bit of a detour, but I ultimately sort of like brought technology and entertainment together back when it wasn't all that cool to do that, and fell into the gaming industry and have loved it ever since. And I've been really fortunate to be in this business.
How interesting. So it sounds like there's a lot of passion in that then, really from family, playing games of Risk or whatever it was you were playing with your dad and your brothers there, and then got passionate about drama for a period and then sort of got interested in technology. Is that fair to say that it doesn't sound like you were interested necessarily from I'm curious about how interested in business were you? I mean, you've become now, now the head of games for the New York Times and had a very senior pathway in that career. How interesting was the idea of making money or having a high-profile job, or whether you're interested in becoming a SVP, GM, sort of growing up, or was that something that came much later, or it's just accidental?
I think it's I think it came later. If I'm honest, I am thought of, I think, as a creative executive, and I have always enjoyed. I am able to sort of connect the directing of plays and sort of my drama former life to to producing video games. I think there's a through line there. Passionate about creating new experiences for audiences and sort of unafraid to dive in and kind of like the blank page and usually lead with kind of a vision of what we're going to do and try to build a team that shares that vision and execute at quality and sort of put quality and the consumer, the user, the viewer, whatever you want to call it, at the forefront of what we're doing. And that has led over time to strong business results. Not always. I do like to take risks, and I've done things that haven't been commercially successful, but it has led to commercial success and in a few cases. And I don't know, maybe that's sort of the Steve Jobs school of thought of, lead with the user, lead with a great product and a great team, and the business results usually follow.
Yeah, exactly. So having all that passion for creating a great product. And one observation is we see a lot of people is sometimes as they get more senior in their career, that can take them further away from the craft, right? It moves them more towards managing people, more towards financial targets. It can suck some of that passion or suck some of that fun out. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm curious when did you start getting more senior in your career and how did that impact either your desires or your personal motivations? Like what was that journey that you went on?
I think it started at Electronic Arts probably. I was there at a really great time when they were expanding studios and expanding projects, and they had a program called EP Accelerator, and I had been a senior producer. I was working on the Sims franchise, and they picked a handful of producers across the whole organization, across various studios, and decided to kind of invest in us and put us through, I think, a 10-week training program. We traveled to different studios. We went into different topics and just kind of like accelerated our skill set around being a leader at the company. And it was very much at EA, the producers who became executive producers, became general managers, they were expected to be game makers and to lead with product and creative vision as well as business and to be kind of I think Ben Gordon called it the full stack GM. And so, yeah, I was like deliberately sort of selected and pushed into that program. And I think that's where it started. I have, since then, I think tried to choose projects that were creatively interesting, but also that I thought would be commercially successful. And that I think became part of the process at EA. What is your vision, not just for something that will be great, but also something that will be commercially successful, identify market opportunities where you're going to be, have a creative advantage or competitive advantage, and sort of build that into, what you're going for. I think I didn't have a lot of interest in putting a lot of time and passion into something that wasn't going to be seen by people and wasn't going to be enjoyed by the largest possible audience. Look, I think as games got more and more expensive as well, and this is a trend that has continued and will continue, you have to be very selective and careful about the projects you're choosing and sort of the sort of business rationale, like why is this going to work and why is this going to reach audiences? If you have that, you still may not be successful, but if you don't have that, you probably won't be successful.
It sounds like, Jonathan, then you're in some ways the EA culture matched quite well with you in terms of you were a creative game maker, but you also had this sort of interest in making things commercially going to be successful, was going to be seen by a lot of people. And that married quite well in helping your career then move to a more executive level on this special program, working with The Sims. And it sounds quite organic then. Is that fair to say? It sort of organically happened, this sort of move to more senior leadership roles, again, from a place of really just wanting to do something interesting that's going to be seen by a lot of people?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I was ambitious as well. I wanted to have big budgets to do what I wanted to do. And in order to secure that, you kind of had to be both a business leader and a creative leader. But, I also partnered with different folks at different times. I worked on the Simpsons game at EA, and I took kind of a pure creative role on that project and had business leaders that I worked for, Scott Amos, St. John Bain. So, and that was fun as well. But I think, after The Simpsons and as I progressed, I was really interested in leading large teams, leading studios, being clear about the vision of the products and the quality bar, but also making sure we were biting off things that had a strong, business case.
And you mentioned you're ambitious there, and I think again, talking to thinking about our listener base, right? People we're trying to help people who are ambitious to grow, and who want to get these more senior roles. Just how did I'm just curious about, like, did you how did your motivations change as you've become more senior? Have they changed, or would you still sort of say they're very similar to when you were earlier on, or do you think there was a moment where you sort of said, again, sometimes we advise people, you have to be quite intentional about your career if you want to go and get the top roles? I'm curious, that maybe wasn't your experience, but were you intentional about that and directed your career towards roles that would lead you with bigger budgets, or again, did it happen just more as a natural sort of linear flow through, if that makes sense?
Probably more organic than it should have been. I don't know that I was always, being crystal clear with myself about career management. As I look back, I think, it was also, who I knew, and I was recruited, when I haven't changed jobs that often, as I look back. And it was usually because somebody was recruiting me. Someone I'd worked with had moved on to a different company and recruited me. I think, I had a reputation throughout that period and even to today as a real doer. I mean, if I'm really honest, like, my superpower is probably just, I push through and get things done and make them happen. And I build things and ship them, and often they're successful, not always. But I think it was hard in that period to find people who, were really driven, could make things happen, knew how to pull a team together, build a team, lead a team, execute, build great software, which is hard to do. And that's probably and that's why I've always loved producer. It's the job I started with. And even though I have executive titles now, I still identify very much with that discipline. And I like the word producer because it's sort of clear right there what you're doing. You're producing things that didn't exist before and now they do. And I think that has kind of summed up my sense of drive and purpose and why people have wanted to hire me, because I ultimately I will produce.
As you were saying it, I was like, it's got that word production in it, or that stem root, right, of production, which sounds like it's really important to you. And I mean, Jonathan, if I heard you correctly, and again, we talk actually about identifying your superpower, right, and understanding what you clearly are adding value to. And it sounds like having that, for you, it was about having a very clear value proposition of what you love doing and what you were really good at. And then it sounds like, again, it wasn't necessarily you going out and looking for these jobs, but actually a lot of people who'd worked with you saying, hey, Jonathan, you've got this reputation. I want to bring you across. I've got this, this role for you, which I think is, again, a very common pathway for a lot of executive roles to move, right? It's again, it's like inside knowledge, or somebody's already doesn't need to reference you because they already know your value. I'm thinking about that because, again, sometimes we talk about the importance of mentors or working with the right people. Have there been significant mentors in your career journey that have helped you, or people you look back on and think this was really helpful? How important would you say if somebody's, let's say they're a manager or a director and they're thinking, hey, I want to get to the VP, SVP level one day, like, how important are those relationships, and how can you nurture them?
I mean, massively important, I would say. And I have been really fortunate. I think my time at EA, again, I was there for almost a decade, and some of the, brightest, most talented people were coming through the company, and some of them are still there. And a lot of us kind of migrated up the peninsula to Zynga together. And so I think of that as more of a, like 15-year cohort of people that I worked with and still know. I think a lot about the late Tim Letourneau. We sadly lost Tim this year to a horrible disease, and he was, we were like brothers at EA, I would say, and he was in the same kind of track, and we had a lot of common traits. And I learned a ton from Tim about working with teams and working in the trenches and getting things done, and also sort of, Tim made that process fun for people and was a great leader and inspirer of people, and just worked really, really hard. And that's probably the biggest thing I got from Tim. You got to care a lot about what you're doing, and then you have to just work hard. But I had amazing mentors like Bing Gordon at EA, and really loved my time with him. Steve Chang, who ran EA Sports and ultimately was at Zynga, and I went with Steve to Warner Brothers. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about the names, but there's been people that I've really admired, and I've been fortunate, I think, to work with some great leaders in the games industry.
Well, Jonathan, what a lovely list there of people who've inspired you, whether that's through how much they care about. Again, it was that passion. Like, you respect how much they care, but also the hard work element, which is coming through as well. And it sounds a really positive journey, Jonathan, I have to say. And it's not to say it shouldn't be, but I suppose, what would you say to some people? Because I think some people can be quite cynical about the sort of climbing the career ladder. And again, there's a lot of nonsense on LinkedIn that we all know, right? That sort of gets put out there about X or Y. And I don't know if you felt it, but I feel it even more on LinkedIn. Sometimes there's this view of executives getting to the top because they're political or cost cutters or something like that, or don't really get what's going on there. I'm just so curious to say how, because again, you've been with some big US-based American organizations, which can sometimes be perceived to be quite political. It's about feathering your own nest, about sort of impressing the right people. How much is politics? It's inevitable you got some politics in any organization. I'm just curious, what's your view on politics in that climbing career ladder? Have you encountered a lot of it? How have you engaged with it? Do you think it's necessary for somebody today who's looking on a same sort of going on the same pathway as yourself?
Yes, politics matters. I think over time, I came to view that word in a more positive light. Politics can be what you make of them. When you're in large organizations, which I have been in for a while now, it's inevitable that you need to navigate that organization. And, Neil Young used to call it like being able to pull the levers of the organization. And I love that phrase.
Can we just clarify, this is Neil Young, the game maker, not Neil Young, the singer? Because the legendary game maker versus the legendary singer.
If you're in a large organization, you do need to navigate it, find the levers, and you need to manage up. And it's not a bad thing, and so I think politics can turn sour, if you've got the wrong people, obviously creating a culture that, and I've certainly been part of cultures that were more toxic in that regard, like competitive to a point of, when people, Ed Catmull, I'm quoting people now like crazy, but Ed Catmull has this book, Creativity Inc., and he has some great thoughts on culture and how to build great teams. And he talks about how sometimes if teams really come to believe that if only I had all the resources, the company would be doing better. It's everyone else's fault that we're struggling, but my team is great, and so I should get all the resources. And this is sort of a dangerous way of thinking. And but when you have teams that are collaborating, maybe competing, but they have shared goals, and you have a strong leadership team that's able to help people navigate prioritization and make tough calls, I think, you can get to a much healthier org. So, I haven't always been, I think, in a positive political environment, but over time, I think I have appreciated the art of it's communication. It's like getting things out of people. It's helping people get on board with your vision. And it might be like about resourcing and other things, but it's more importantly, it's about growing the overall business and, making sure everybody is on the same page. And like those things require a kind of politics, but politics is just, working with people to make things happen. And that's not a bad thing. It's an essential thing, especially as you get more senior. The things you say as a senior leader, they reverberate throughout the organization. The higher up you go. And so you need to be thoughtful about how you're wielding that kind of influence. So it's up, it's across, it's down, it's throughout the org.
There's a lot I love about what you've said there, Jonathan. I think you could break down several of those topics into their own podcast, right? And what I heard was that you're saying is about communication, right? And I thought, we're big on this podcast of sometimes it's seen as a magic art being sort of a leader, like leadership is a magic or innate ability, or charisma is this sort of innate sort of thing that either people have or they don't have. Whereas actually sometimes you can break down these things to actually it's at the end of the day, it's people you're dealing with, and you have to be able to communicate with those people and understand they've got priorities and pressures and balancing that, if that's reasonable for what I heard there. And as you said, also I think good thing to draw out. So I think you said the weight of your words goes up as you become more senior, right? If you're, as a dev, you can sort of mouth off about the org, right? And freely say, oh, no, this doesn't work or whatever, right? But you don't necessarily have that freedom to go and present that face, I'd suggest, when you get more senior. So working again, so it sounds like somebody's looking at making that transition. It might be working on your communication skills, not being afraid of the idea of managing up, right? It's not a betrayal or some sort of dark art. It's actually just helpful for everyone.
Well, I would say if you're not aligned with your, C-suite or your senior executives, you're doing your team a disservice. So it's managing up, but I think it's more importantly about alignment across the organization. Otherwise, if you're out of alignment with your leaders, your team might be like, oh, great, they're one of us, but in the end, it's going to bite them if the senior team is, not on the same page, So I think, but yeah, I mean, communication becomes really essential, and I think it's also about the vision and the strategy and making sure everybody is understanding it, right? Agreeing with it, that they can repeat it back to their teams. This is essential. People want to be led, and even the most independent-minded, self-managing people, they still fundamentally crave leadership. And I really believe this. I think it's human nature to crave that leadership and direction. And so you need to give it to people, and high-performing people, their bar is just higher, for the leader that they want to work for and believe in. And so, when you lay out a vision, a strategy that is going to make them successful, they're going to be, having a high bar for that and making sure that it makes sense to them and that they buy it. But more importantly, is the higher up you go in the org, you want that person to turn around and sell the same vision to their team. And to be able to replicate what you're trying to say, your vision, your strategy. And when some of the most satisfying moments for me at work are when I hear someone on the team sort of repeating the vision, the strategy, the goals, the language that I have crafted to help motivate people. And when I see someone take that same language and use it with their team, I know that I'm sort of like successfully propagating throughout the organization. And I would not be afraid of just repeating things over and over. And that can begin to feel a little bit like a politician, right? Who crafts a message, and then they just repeat that message over and over and sort of hammer it to voters, as they go from county to county. And that's important. You want to have, at the New York Times Games, our vision is to be the premier destination for digital puzzles. And I just try to say that to people as often as I can. At the company, our mission is to seek the truth and help people understand the world. Our company strategy is to be the essential subscription for curious people seeking to engage with and understand the world. These are really important phrases that have had a lot of thought go into them, and they're inspiring and they're motivating and they're clarifying. And it's important to repeat them over and over so that people really can then repeat them to their teams and internalize them. And so that's a big part of it. And that can feel a little at times rehearsed or, like you're just, it could even feel inauthentic to people. So you have to kind of work on making sure that even if you're repeating yourself, it's authentic.
It sounds, again, that communication, but it's not necessarily a magic thing. Sometimes it's just about having something quite simple that you're sure on, right? That is clear. It's authentic in terms of the mission's authentic, right? That's where you're going. And then being able to stick with it and keep it focused so that people know where they stand. I suppose they can either say, like, I'm excited by that or I'm not, but they know what it is, right? Rather than they're hearing maybe many different things, or they're not sure week to week what the strategy or the plan or the objective is. And I'd imagine that gives quite a lot of tethering or anchoring to a team, right? Because you can always come back to that of like, well, what am I always told, right? If we're doing this, then we're on the right path. If we're not, then that's a time to maybe kick it up and say, where are we going, or doing something different. And John, I mean, you brought it up here, right? And I think a lot of people are curious. You're someone who's made games for all these great games companies, games like The Sims, etc., and big household names. And then you've gone to the New York Times, and this is before they were known for gaming, before the Wordle acquisition, which you did, etc. So I'm really curious, like, what was, again, we're thinking about maybe a lot of people in games today who are thinking about not being in games and like, what's it like to make the move outside? Was that a high, how did that feel? Was that high risk? How did that come up? Tell us the story of stepping outside of a traditional games company to a non-traditional media or traditional media company.
Yeah, well, it was 2020. I had left Warner Brothers Games earlier in the year. The pandemic hit. It was lockdown, and I was taking, most of 2020 off, having just, worked nonstop for, many, many years. And late in, I think it was in the fall of 2020, a recruiter from the New York Times reached out to me. They'd gotten my name from someone in my network who'd recommended me. They were looking for a head of games. And, I had run the Words with Friends team at Zynga. I have a sort of connection to that type of audience and word puzzles and word games. We talked about that, board games. I felt a real affinity for casual games that kind of make you think, and that maybe kind of stretch the mind a little bit. And so I think that popped on the resume, and that was, along with a good recommendation, just sort of how the door got opened. I immediately thought, I want to do that. I think it was the brand, and that has become increasingly important to me in my career, and to, I think, the industry writ large. Brands just really matter, and when you have a brand as strong as the New York Times, I knew that was going to be very valuable, and it has turned out to be. The New York Times has been making games for about 80 plus years. We ran our first crossword puzzle in 1942 in the paper, and there's been a very strong tradition of games and puzzles at the company in the paper for a long, long time. And I'm not afraid to say, in grad school, I used to buy the New York Times and take the crossword puzzle and throw the news in the bin. And it was great entertainment, at a great price. So I think that has been true, that sort of idea that, hey, the news is really important, but sometimes I just want to do the puzzle. So I kind of saw that tradition. I did see also that the team had begun experimenting with additional games above and beyond the crossword. So you saw Spelling Bee come out in 2018, which was, also a sort of a paper puzzle that had been translated to digital, but mobile form factor. You could tell it was appealing more broadly than the crossword. It was a little more fun to do, versus maybe you have to be kind of hardcore to solve a Friday crossword puzzle from the New York Times. It's difficult. It's time consuming. You have to get good at it. And Spelling Bee, I could see, like moms and kids were playing it together, and but it still had that kind of New York Times sort of elegance to it, and a bit of challenge. And it's obviously about words. But I could sort of see, okay, A, I love the brand. B, I can kind of see where they're going. This could be a portfolio of games, not just a crossword puzzle. And then lastly, I could tell there was so much to be done. That the platform work was kind of nowhere. There was a lot of strategy work to be done. There was, you could play the games across lots of different surfaces, and the tech strategy hadn't been figured out. And I'm a doer. I'm a producer. I like the blank page. I like sort of building things, and I could tell it was going to be really fun to sort of build this gaming platform at the New York Times. So those were all the reasons I kind of immediately wanted to do it, and it's been great. And we've just had a ton of success. Obviously, Wordle. Acquiring Wordle just sort of supercharged the vision for everything. And, we probably got there a lot faster than I thought we would when I took the job, because of Wordle. And it's been a great run so far.
Hearing that journey, then, it sounds like it was quite a strategic, if I can use that word, or quite a thought through logical progression for you. I mean, it certainly doesn't sound like a punt, right? Like it sounded like there's alignment of actually there's a lot of overlap in games. You identified like the branding as well, something you're attracted to, and you had sort of almost personal affinity with, being a consumer yourself and perhaps coming from a world of being interested in games and authors in cryptography and things like this, right? It sounds like it was really a role that was well suited for you, even though maybe from the outside, I sort of painted it out as kind of a big jump of, games to non-game systems. But when you explain it like that, and again, helping others thinking about this transition, it might be actually, not only finding what is a good fit, but also one where you saw the strategic opportunity to say, hey, and I can do a lot here, right? And I can add a lot of value potentially. Again, it's always risk, right, involved in this, but it sounds like it was quite a considered thing. I mean, just emotionally, it sounds like you're running towards it. I don't know, but did you have that hesitation of, oh, will I be able to go back to games when this doesn't work out?
No, I didn't have any of that hesitation. Maybe I should have, but it didn't. I mean, look, I'd worked for Warner Brothers for 4 years. This is also like traditionally not a gaming company. It's a movie studio. And, looking back, I don't know that was forefront in my mind, but I think if you talk to people that have worked in games at, say, a Disney or a Warner Brothers, those companies, games is not always at the center of what they do. It can be kind of peripheral, and that is a different kind of challenge, I think, when you're working for an organization that has movies, or even in the case of Disney, maybe theme parks at the heart of their enterprise, and games doesn't always seem like the first priority. It may seem like the third or fourth priority. It's a different kind of navigation, and so maybe that kind of like warmed me up to the idea. But I just think I didn't really give it. I thought about the brand, I thought about the product, I thought about what I could bring to it, and that was enough for me. And I don't actually see it as a too big of a departure, but I've always been kind of a gaming optimist. I believe that everyone is a gamer. Like I fundamentally believe it's human nature to play, the need for play, and it's sort of what has made us a civilized species. And you see it even in other species. There's this need for play to, for whatever reason, is just part of our evolution, to work out problems in a nonviolent way, to learn about the world, to learn about how to interact with each other. Games have just played this essential role in our development as a species. And so I just think, obviously you have lots of different kinds of games that appeal to lots of different kinds of audiences, and gamer usually sort of, conjures up images of like, sweaty teenagers with headphones and, playing Counter-Strike or, Fortnite or whatever. But, I think with Wordle, we've really, landed that point that, I'm not a gamer. I would never play games. And it's like, okay, well, what are you doing right now? Well, I'm just doing the Wordle. That's different, So I just really didn't think that it was that big of a departure, and it's worked out.
It worked out extremely well, right? And I agree. I don't think, again, there's a really interesting evolution of what does it mean to be a gamer, right? Because I think of my mum classically would get very upset if you described her as a gamer, but she loves online Scrabble, and it's sort of actually has been gamified up, but actually like it's tagged, right, rather than actual describer necessarily there. So I think we're seeing that re-evolution. I love what you're saying about play there as well, because I think it's so fundamental, and I think this is where the questions are coming from, because we see this convergence of playfulness, which is inherent to human beings, and broader consumer world, right? And therefore, I think people are looking more at talent from the gaming industry to come and help them understand that and bring that in. If you were to think of, for listeners at home or in the car, etc., where they're thinking about potentially eyeing up that change, and if you're giving them any advice or pitfalls or things to double down on to help them make that move, what might advice, again, not just to the New York Times, but into a sort of more adjacent sector to gaming, what would you have any advice, or what your thoughts might a friend who came to say to you, like, I'm thinking about that transition, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would depend upon the opportunity, the company. I think it's important to make sure there's a consumer promise that makes sense, I guess. Like not every company is going to be able to tack on a games initiative and just have it work. Like you're seeing it a lot now. And, I think consumers can kind of sniff it out when it's not authentically connected to the core values of the company, or the consumer promise. People do kind of have this like, oh, New York Times games, whatever. But then, the reality is that the tradition around puzzles and thoughtful brain teasers and to go alongside the news as a kind of like maybe departure or break from the news when the news is really hard, and then you have this moment of joy to kind of like use your brain and solve a puzzle, and it's very natural. It sort of comes out of who we are and the DNA of the company. Our whole sort of strategy and mission is around serving curious readers and curious people, and our games are tailored toward curious people, curious readers. And they're not just any kind of game. You're not going to see us build shooters or racing games. We're building puzzles that you have to work out, and there's a solution. And then when you get it, you feel smart and you feel good about yourself. And then, you put it down, come back to tomorrow's puzzle when the next one comes out, and they're handcrafted and they're editorially driven and much like the news, in that sense, with standards and fact checking and all the rest of it. So it's, I just would encourage people to be cautious about something that feels like a sort of attack on or a gimmick, because consumers will, they'll reject that. And I think they've embraced what we do because it has come out of a long tradition, and it's core to our mission and all of that. So
approaching a certain amount of due diligence, a certain amount of thoughtfulness about where you're going to stand within the org, right? And how much of a priority this is, or how much of a bandwagon. Because again, I mean, CEOs, they will jump on, or their shareholders will jump on, right? We need to be more gamified because Duolingo and NYT are doing it, right? And then it's like, we need to be more AI-fied or whatever it is, right? There, so you're almost sort of caught out if it's not really, I suppose, strategically makes sense.
I would say too that, gamification that's a pretty big word, and it's kind of thrown around a lot. And I think there are companies that have benefited from understanding like player motivation and core loops and reward systems and things that you might sort of put under the banner of gamification. And they're not really making games, but they're sort of leveraging some mechanics and tactics that have worked in games to drive engagement and retention. And I think that has been very powerful and successful across a lot of different organizations. I was up at Strava a few months back. I was invited to come talk to the product team there by the CPO, Matt Salazar. Matt was at Zynga. Matt and I built Farmville for mobile together. Rob Terrell is the CTO at Strava. He was on the Farmville Castleville team and ultimately became the CTO of Zynga. And so you've got this ex-Zynga team, and there's some other names there as well that have gone to Strava to really help drive their future. And so we're seeing, experienced gaming leaders, work their way into other companies and bring those skill sets but that doesn't always have to mean, I mean, you're not going to open the Strava app tomorrow and suddenly there's puzzles to solve, right? Matt's not going to do that. And he's going to be very careful and thoughtful about what makes Strava. What's the vision of Strava? Like, what's the promise there? And what are we trying to do? And could some gamification tactics help, better deliver, the vision of, whatever it is for Strava, which is like get out into the world and do activities and, build a community of like-minded people that are trying to better themselves and whatever. I don't have the Strava message down pat, but I know there is one, and he's going to go there and think deeply about not just tacking games onto Strava, but mechanics that can help better deliver on the vision of Strava. So I think there's a lot of opportunity like that out there across a lot of different organizations. And I definitely would support and encourage people to bring those skill sets to bear across various industries.
Yeah, and I think it's a trend we're going to see continue to grow. As you say, I mean, games are really good at retaining people and engaging people and educating them about certain behaviors, right? Or pathways there. So I think it's all valuable to other formats. If it's got right, it can be got wrong there as well. And Jonathan, really appreciate your thoughts here on both your career and people looking at making that move. Another part of our podcast very much aimed at helping people make better hiring decisions themselves. Would love to hear. So, what's your philosophy when you're thinking about building out your teams? It sounds like you've built some very successful teams. Do you have a set philosophy, or how do you approach hiring? And what's your initial thoughts whenever you're starting a hiring process for someone who's senior individual in your team?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's the most important thing you can do, right? None of this is possible without great people, without great teams that have great team dynamics, and sort of assembling a strong team to go after the opportunity, to go after the vision, to execute and do it in a way that is positive, with a positive culture. I mean, this is in some ways, harder than the product itself, and more important. I think, what do I look for? I think, probably unsurprisingly, I look for people who have a passion for the work that they're going to be signing up for, that they really care, and it sounds simple, but I really try to understand, like, do you really care about this thing we're doing? Are you going to have a high bar for quality? Are you going to identify with these users and these customers, and treat this product like it was a child of yours? Are you going to truly care about the work we're doing? Because I need people who can go off and self-manage and make things happen, who are going to in turn lead other people. And so first and foremost, I need to know that they're going to truly care about that and have a high standard. Yeah, I think also, like, I increasingly, and we have, by the way, at the New York Times, like, an incredibly thoughtful and rigorous hiring process, and I think it's the best I've seen, and I've been super impressed by it. And I think I probably focus less on what people have done, and more try to get through the process a sense of what they're going to do.
How do you uncover that? Because that's surely that's in the future. So how are you unlocking that? It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I of course will read people's CVs and maybe briefly ask them what their day to day is. Try to get a sense for what they've done, but that's, if they're at the table, then they've probably done well somewhere else, right? But I think it's much more important to lay out. So okay, you get this job. What are you going to do? What's your vision for? And why do you even want this job? And how are you going to attack it if you get it? Sometimes that's creating actual scenarios or tests for people, or having them build out a presentation. It depends on the role. Like with game designers, I've always loved to give them game design tests that, I'll have them, I'll say, hey, design me a simulation game based on garbage collection, or something. And just to sort of see how they would think about going about designing something, or if it's a business role, what's the opportunity you see for us and what would you do? Just, I think getting people talking about that, because often you will get what they tell you, whatever they tell you they're going to do is what they're going to do when they get here. So yeah, those are some things I look for. I mean, obviously you want people who can collaborate well, especially leaders. Can they collaborate with other leaders? Can they work along with people on a shared vision, a shared objective, or are they going to be territorial? So you have to kind of sniff those things out.
How do you sniff that out? Because everyone's going to say, I like teamwork, or I collaborate well. I'd hope most people are saying they like collaborating with others. So how do you sniff that out?
Well, you either get them to tell you about a time when they were faced with difficult decisions around driving their own agenda versus collaborating with others. Or again, you paint a scenario for the future. Hey, like, if you come here, this thing might happen and you might be in this situation with others. Like, how would you approach that? I think, also we have folks that are, expert at interviewing for collaboration skills. So we'll sort of break down the interview panel, where everybody kind of takes a topic, and we'll usually have someone take the topic of collaboration and just really go deep on that. So I think, a really rigorous interview process with, with panels where every candidate is getting the same questions, for fairness and equity, where you've got specialists that are diving into specific topics. I think that process is really helpful in making sure you don't make a mistake. It can, it's more of a red light process than a green light process. it doesn't guarantee that the person you hire is going to be incredible, but it can make sure that you don't make a terrible mistake. I think making sure you get someone who is going to truly crush it. I usually just really try to are they going to care deeply? And B, like give them scenarios of the future and see, how they respond and what would they do, and is that aligned with where you want to go. I will also add though that I have been, I think, successful when I hired people who made me a little uncomfortable in some of those answers, that maybe the things that they want to do were sort of challenging to the vision I had, or people who I felt like, oh man, like I'm probably going to learn from that person. They're bringing something to the table that I don't have or I haven't thought of. So I think you want to look for that, but also make sure that it's going to be, in the vision, like, you want like a strong diversity of points of view and ideas, but you don't want a diversity of vision. You want a single vision. So yeah, it's a balance, and it's a bit of art and science, but those are some of the things I look for.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot that John, that's great there. And I think, as you've highlighted, the reason why it's so hard, right, this question is because it is a balance, right? It depends a lot on from function to functional, role to role, I'd imagine as well. You want that, or even the stage of the company, right? Whether you need more execution focus versus more vision, or more creativity versus more just getting things out the door, right? Sometimes I'd imagine there, and I think you were saying that some takeaways I got there was having it sounds like you've got a very structured process. You've got a clearly what's the word, not conformist process, but it sounds like you try and have the same process for each person, right? Which helps drive consistency of evaluation, right? So you can stack candidates up against you because they've been through the same sort of questions. And then you've also got certain people who are good at interviewing for certain things, whether it's collaboration or whatever it is, being able to give them the clear light that that's the area that they're going to go deep on. And again, just picking up something there, which I think might be helpful for people, is that openness to perhaps being challenged, which I think sometimes it can be kind of difficult going into an interview process, right? Because you're naturally in a certain power dynamic, but it sounds, it's good for people to hear. Again, maybe not everyone wants to hear that, but if you're that sort of person, right, like be authentic to yourself, and it might go down well, actually, if you're saying, look, actually, here's my vision, and it's a little bit different for what you guys are doing, right? Like, how do you think about that? I'm not sure that is the right way. I don't know, and maybe it excites you or doesn't, it completely turns you off, but it doesn't sound like it's necessarily something you should avoid, full stop, having that ability to say something that's not what you're expecting to hear, if that's fair to say, not being sort of very safe in your answers as a potential to really stand out. Because again, we're all about trying to think about how do you stand out, and I think sometimes people steer towards safety, but that's not so as good a strategy as taking a little bit more risk.
I think so. I mean, like I hear from a lot of people, they'll caveat, look, I haven't seen your data. I don't know your business. If I get there, I'll want to look at trends and data and research that you've done to fully understand what's going on. So with that caveat, here's how I would think about it. Here's how I would approach it. And I think that's always helpful to hear. You want someone who's got visions, got the ability to execute, and make the future happen, as opposed to just kind of going along with it, or just trying to make, please people. I also will, in interviews, really turn it over to the candidate as much as possible, because I find that like the questions they're asking of me can be very revealing about what's important to them. And so that's a key piece as well. And that can create red flags as well as green flags in terms of, well, why are they asking that? Sometimes a question will come across as kind of like defensive or self-serving, or like, well, I'm going to need to make sure that, I'm treated this way or that, or I'm worried about this. You've got this other person, like, how am I going to have to work with that person? Like, you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, there's a defensiveness or an insecurity there. But also, sometimes the questions can be, really challenging and revelatory. So I think that's probably the funnest part of the process for me.
That's touching on something we've talked about on this pod before, actually, is that the ability of the questions at the end. And we hear it from many hiring managers on the searches we work on, is somebody will say they ask great questions. And that can really be the bit that actually just lights it up. They said, good. We've even had somebody say, I was sort of on the fence about them until they started asking their questions. And that's when I really got interested. And again, perhaps it switches a little bit from the what have you done, right? Which can be sometimes hard to evaluate to what are you going to do? Or like, how am I going to fit in? Or like, how do we build X, Y, Z, which can really turn a conversation, set a light a bit or make it much more interesting for both parties.
Yeah, and do your research too, right? Like that's an opportunity to show people that you've done the research. I feel fortunate at this point if I have a candidate who hasn't done the research, doesn't know our product, those people don't even usually get to my desk at this point. And if they do, it's always kind of a turnoff. It's the bare minimum you can do is to really prepare, and it shows. Going back to that first point around how much do you care? If you're not doing that level of work in the process, then it shows people that you don't care all that much. So that can be a big red flag.
No, well, I think again we're seeing from the same hymn sheet here, and it's a large part of what I feel we say. Talk about consistency of message. A large part of our podcast is do your preparation. Like in virtually every area you can. Like the more prep you're doing, the more strategic you can be about thinking and directed, then that's always going to help out, over the long term. And even against senior candidates who you think, in a senior level, you think everyone is doing this, but actually you can still stand out by going a level deeper or having thought about it a little bit more against other people. So I think that's you're helpfully reinforcing at least some of the things we've been saying to people is the right way forward here, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, especially in this day and age when all the information in the world is at your fingertips, and you've got AI now that can help you think about. If you can't take the 30 minutes required to get up to speed on what you're interviewing for, then you probably aren't the right person for the job.
Self-selecting that. And Jonathan, always curious to hear what the benefits of people's accumulated wisdom. Is there anything about your hiring approach or the question you're asking that's changed over time from experience? So if you were to go back 10 years ago, you might have said, well, I really validated this, but I had this experience that made me sort of think or evolve my thinking.
Danger of repeating myself, but I think that the biggest shift that I probably made was to focus less on what they've done and more on what they will do. I think if earlier in my career, I probably was just going like, oh, tell me about your time there. What did you do? Like, tell me about your time there. What did you do? Oh, they've done a bunch of great stuff. Like, we should hire them. And I think that was a big shift for me.
What elevated them? What led you to that conclusion that there was a better way? Or was it from hiring different people? Was it learning from other people? Curious to what was the catalyst there?
It might have been my own development, frankly. As I started to realize in my career that resting on your laurels is just not, is not going to be a productive way to grow your career. And talking to people about what you've done, is like, it can be fun from time to time to be like, oh, we worked on this thing and it was great. But, the games industry is so dynamic, it's changing all the time. And so you have to kind of, every new enterprise, every new game you dive into, new studio, new initiative is fraught with risk. There's nobody that can just say like, well, I've got a formula, it's worked for me 3 times. And so everything I do from here forward will be, the Midas touch. And, it just doesn't work that way. It's you can accumulate experiences and wisdom and you can pattern match the things that have worked. And, but it's the skill of like meeting the moment and facing the future and solving problems, leading people, that's what matters. So I think I kind of learned that maybe the hard way as I dove into things that maybe I wasn't quite ready for, dove into things where I was maybe just a little bit too much resting on like, well, I was successful over here, so I'll be successful over here. And then finding like, oh, this is, I'm over my head, or this is way more complicated than I thought. And so as I, evaluated other people, I probably just was using my own journey as like, oh, I got to be careful that I'm not hiring a version of me who's in over his head,
Interesting. Yeah. And I think, to your point, I think it's much broader than games. I don't know, if you just get older, you start feeling like everyone feels the world is changing faster. I don't know if that's eternally true, but it suddenly feels that for me, right? It's like that rate of change and what was true 5 years ago, or was that, it might not be true today, right? As an assumption or a pattern to be successful. And again, so the pace of technology, AI and non-AI, right, is so rapid, and the world is changing so rapidly that it sort of goes back to that idea of the sort of the skills that you're hiring, right, and the adaptability is as important or equally important to some of that experience for what you're looking for. Interesting. And question I'm curious about, maybe it's a sort of wonky question of questions that headhunters a bit. How important do you feel referencing is, and how do you use in that process? And to give some context, I've had some clients who sort of don't put a lot of store by it, oddly, because to me it's odd, because they sort of say, well, you're going to hear nice things, or get to the truth too much. And some people, and I'm on the more camp, saying it's quite critical, and some people saying it's really for onboarding, but they don't see it as a store of necessarily hire that person. But just curious of where's your experience, or where's your thinking about the use of referencing in a hiring process?
I think it's very important. I think it's, again, more in that kind of red light process than green light process, maybe category of just sometimes great people can have critical derailers, or, can have trouble working with others. They can create a toxic environment, even if they're super talented and productive. And so you need to do a real gut check to make sure that you're not hiring a jerk, basically. So that's how I see that. And it depends on the role and whatnot. But if I know people who've worked with this person, but I have not worked with them, then I'll just text them, like, hey, what was your experience with so-and-so? Just to get a gut check on whether that person's a jerk, and or a phony or something, or a fraud in some way. You can kind of get that very quickly. I think there's the sort of reference checking and background checking that the HR department does, the recruiting team, that's really essential as well. And sometimes the recruiting team will come back and say, hey, we talked to 3 people and, everything was fine. And you tend to not focus on it too much, but then they'll say like, hey, we talked to one person who said this and that about working with them. And, then that can play a role, and it can derail the candidacy for sure. So, I think it's a balance. Look, I just got done saying the most important thing is what they will do, not what they have done. And I still do think that's true, but, life is a balance. And if they have done things in the past that are going to be problematic, in what you're trying to get done, like, people deserve second chances. So you have to evaluate, with all the other information you're getting, if they've just kind of screwed something up in the past and you feel like they can get over it. But, it's really critical to create culture, collaboration, teamwork, and you need people that are serious-minded about that, who and are not just driving their own personal agenda. And you can kind of root that out sometimes in reference checking.
So it sounds like, again, it's a part of this red light rather than green light. And by that, I think you mean you're looking for flags to say no, rather than you have to fill up a row of green lights.
Yeah, because it can be just as dangerous to get a reference and they say, oh, this person's amazing, you should hire them. And then you go, okay, well, that's now the basis of my decision. That's pretty dangerous as well. So
it's a tool in your toolkit, but you're using it sort of selectively or with thoughtfulness around certain things. But again, sort of it's not just 100% or 0%, but it's part of a matrix of things you're using to both the interview process, but checking that's real and all the rest. Helpful. John, anything we haven't, you've been very generous with your time here. Anything else we haven't covered that you think would be interesting for our listeners to hear?
Well, I think in the end, I still believe in, going with instinct at the end of a hiring process. I've been fortunate to have a couple where, in recent memory, where, it came down to 2 like ideal candidates, and you're sort of talking to your recruiting team and they're looking at you going like, hey, you can't go wrong here. Like, they're both great. and how do you pick? How do you like make that final decision? And I think at the end of the day, you still want to process all the data you've gotten, and then take a deep breath and try to visualize the future of that person, coming into the organization, and what are they going to do, and how's that going to all work, and make a judgment call and make it. And there's still room for, I think, instinct and kind of going with your gut in this endeavor. If you've done all the homework and you've got a great process, then I think that piece is still really valid and critical.
The use of instinct. I think a CEO said to me once, he said, the thing about instinct is there'll be informers of instinct that you will never be aware of why they're informing you. You might become aware of some of them, but there's like subconscious things that'll be part of that decision making you might never be aware of. And if you try and override those things, eventually this will come out, right? Because it might be some incompatibility of style or some grating or something like that. And I've heard that very consistently. That sort of just as much, and it's funny because we live in a world where we also sort of can be suspicious of our instincts. Or you don't want to go 100% on gut because that can betray you, but equally, I think there's something in that marrying of the sort of intellectual rigor and the process, but also some base level, you also need to bring in that gut feel because it will have an insight which you can't get to, you can't even be aware of sometimes around what works with a person or why you're excited or not excited to work with them. And I think generally when people look back on their lives and have gone really against a gut instinct where they sort of talked themselves into doing something, they're like, convinced myself into it because everything on paper said yes. Often actually down the line, they say, really didn't work out and I wish I'd listened to that voice at the back of my head or whatever it is. Great. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time there. It's been a fascinating chat through, again, a really sort of interesting background. You went back to your sort of early, you can sort of hear the early young Jonathan in that family game, leading in a very sort of unpredictable way, but actually it's a very sort of coherent, logical way through to working these great games companies and then building this fantastic franchise or product vision for NYT and delighting, and you're now working on products which I don't have.
Well, tens of millions of people are playing our games every week. It's a pretty big audience.
Fantastic, right? Like what a great story there, where it's really been productive and created a lot of delight for people. So I know a lot of our users will be grateful for you for doing such great work, but also grateful for your time and expertise here. So thank you very much, Jonathan.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
That's another episode of Mission 1, The Executive Edge. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe and leave us a review. It helps other professionals discover the show.
Have a question about executive hiring or want to share your own experience? Reach out on LinkedIn or visit mission1.io/podcast. We read everything, and your stories often inspire future episodes.
The Executive Edge is brought to you by Mission 1, where we specialize in placing senior leaders at tech, entertainment, and AI companies. Learn more at mission1.io.
Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again soon on The Executive Edge.